When the most feared crime lord in Chicago answered his private cell at 2 in the morning, he expected an ambush, a betrayal, or a body count. He did not expect a breathless young emergency room aide telling him his 8-year-old daughter had just been found unconscious in the parking garage of Cook County Hospital, and that the only reason the little girl was still breathing was because a complete stranger had refused to walk away. What happened next turned Chicago's entire underworld inside out, and it started, the way most impossible things do, with one person choosing kindness when every single instinct screamed at them to keep moving. The overnight parking garage beneath Cook County Hospital smelled the way all parking garages will smell after midnight: exhaust fumes, concrete dust, and the particular loneliness of fluorescent lights that flicker once every few minutes like they're tired of trying. Nadia Okafor pulled her hospital badge lanyard over her head and tucked it into the pocket of her scrubs as she walked toward the elevator bank on level 2. Her shift had ended 40 minutes ago, but a patient on the cardiac floor had needed someone to sit with her while her family drove in from Rockford, and Nadia had stayed. She always stayed. It was a quality that had gotten her into considerable financial trouble over the years, because staying always meant missing the earlier bus, which meant the late bus, which ran every 45 minutes. And tonight the late bus had been rerouted due to a water main break on Michigan Avenue. She'd had to park, which cost $19 she did not technically have. She was running the math on her checking account, the grim, silent arithmetic of a woman who knew exactly how many dollars stood between her and the edge, when she heard it. A sound so small she almost convinced herself it was wind pushing through a drainage grate. The kind of breathing that had a wrong quality to it, shallow where it should be deep, labored where it should be easy. Nadia stopped walking. Level 2 was mostly empty at this hour. A handful of cars belonging to the overnight staff, a delivery van near the pillar on the south end, and there, wedged between a concrete sulfur column and the rear wheel well of a black sedan with tinted windows, was a child, a little girl. Dark hair plastered to her forehead, pale as chalk. She was wearing a private school uniform, navy pleated skirt, white Oxford shirt monogrammed with the initials EV, and she was alone, and her lips had the faint blue tinge of someone whose oxygen situation was not acceptable. Nadia dropped to her knees. Hey, sweetheart, open your eyes." She pressed 2 fingers to the girl's neck. Pulse was there, but it was thin and fast, the kind of pulse that emergency medicine training teaches you to treat with urgency. She was an ER aide, not a nurse or a doctor, but she had spent 3 years watching what bad pulses led to, and she knew this one needed attention. "Can you hear me? What's your name?" The girl's lashes fluttered, her eyes opened. Dark brown, enormous, glassy, with something that might have been fever or might have been something else entirely. "Don't call," the girl whispered. Her voice was barely there, a filament of sound. "Don't call the hospital. Call my papa." She reached into the waistband of her skirt, a strange place for a child to keep anything, and produced a phone in a matte black case, no apps visible on the lock screen. Just one contact listed beneath a photograph of a man who looked like he had been carved from something harder than stone. The contact name read only, Papa. Nadia looked at the phone. She looked at the child. She looked at the elevator bank 20 feet away, which would take her up to the ER where she could hand this problem to people with stethoscopes and actual medical degrees. The girl grabbed her wrist. Surprising grip for someone who could barely breathe. "Please," she said. "Just Papa. He'll come." Nadia called. It rang once. "Who is this?" Not a question. A demand delivered in a voice so low and controlled it felt less like speech and more like a door closing on something dangerous. "My name is Nadia Okafor. I'm an ER aide at Cook County Hospital. I found a little girl in the parking garage on level 2. She's conscious, but her breathing is labored and she's cold, and she told me not to call 911. She called you Papa." A pause. The initials on her shirt are EV. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Nadia would later count them back in her memory many times, understanding that those 3 seconds were the distance between the version of her life that existed before the call and everything that came after. Evangeline. The name came out of the man, like something being pulled from a wound. Stay with her. Do not move her. Do not bring anyone else to her location. My people will be there in 6 minutes. Farnth. Another pause hard, then Wafan. If you leave her, Miss Okafor, I will find you, if you are not exactly where you are standing when my men arrive. I understand, Nadia said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. She's scared and she's cold. I'll stay. A beat of silence that felt improbably like something shifting. Keep her warm, the man said, and the line went dead. Nadia took off her cardigan, the thick charcoal one she'd bought from the Goodwill on Wabash, the one she wore over her scrubs on overnight shifts because the hospital ran cold, and wrapped it around Evangeline's shoulders. The little girl leaned into her immediately, the way children lean into warmth before they've decided whether to trust it. Papa's coming, Nadia said, and she sounded steadier than she felt. He'll be here soon. Can you tell me what happened? Did you fall? Evangeline shook her head slowly. Her eyes kept drifting closed. The man with the rings, she murmured. He said he was taking me to surprise Papa. He said, get in the elevator. Then I felt she stopped, her brow furrowed like she was trying to remember something that kept sliding away from her. Dizzy. I felt dizzy. And then you were here. Nadia felt the skin on her arms go tight. The elevator. The black sedan. A little girl in an expensive school uniform left alone in a parking garage when someone had clearly intended for her not to be left alone at all. And Evangeline wasn't sick in the way patients were sick when they came through the ER doors. She was compromised. In the clinical corner of Nadia's mind, something slotted coldly into place. She'd been dosed with something. The cars arrived in 5 minutes, not 6, which told Nadia something about how seriously the man on the phone had taken her call. 3 black Escalades that moved without sirens and stopped with military precision across the entrance of Level 2. The men who stepped out were large and quiet and wore expressions like weather, unreadable, inevitable. The one who walked toward Nadia first was built like a cargo container and had the kind of scarred face that came from a life of being in the wrong places and surviving anyway. You the Aide, he said. Yes. He looked at Evangeline. Something shifted in his face, too fast to read. He knelt down beside the little girl with a gentleness that didn't match his dimensions. Hey, little bean, you gave us a scare. Evangeline opened her eyes. Cord, she said, and grabbed his sleeve. I've got you. He scooped her up with one arm, supporting her head with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. He glanced back at Nadia. Boss says bring you. I heard you might say that, Nadia said, because the man on the phone had made her future fairly clear, and arguing with 400 pounds of men who drove cars with no license plates in a parking garage at 2 in the morning was not a category of decision-making she was willing to engage in. She got in the car. The drive took 12 minutes. They headed north on Lake Shore Drive, the city's skyline sliding past the window in a wash of lights and the black expanse of Lake Michigan on her right. And then they were turning into the underground entrance of a building in the Gold Coast that had no visible sign and a security gate with a guard who stood up very straight when the Escalades approached. The elevator they put her in went up without buttons. Someone used a key card. When the doors opened, Nadia stepped into a room that felt like it existed on a different planet from the parking garage she'd just come from. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake. Furniture that cost more per piece than Nadia made in a year. And in the center of the room, a man who was on the phone, speaking in low, rapid Italian, who turned around when he heard the elevator doors and whose eyes went immediately, not to Nadia, but to his daughter. Cord carried Evangeline to the leather sofa and set her down with the same careful gentleness. Vincent Ferraro crossed the room in 4 strides, and the phone call ended without a goodbye. He crouched beside his daughter and cupped her face in both hands, and for a moment there was nothing in the room that mattered except the 2 of them. Papa, Evangeline said, and leaned her forehead against his. Vincent Ferraro was 41 years old, and ran the Ferraro organization with the kind of precision that had kept him alive, and in power for 14 years, in a city where the average tenure of someone in his position was considerably shorter. He was the kind of handsome that photographs couldn't quite capture. Too sharp, too present, too much of something that the camera flattened into ordinariness. Up close, in the dim gold light of his penthouse, he was simply the most dangerous-looking man Nadia Okafor had ever seen in her life. He pulled his daughter close, pressed his lips to her forehead, closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he stood up. He turned and looked at Nadia, and Nadia understood why people who worked for him moved when he told them to move. "You're the woman who stayed," he said. "I'm the woman who found her and stayed," Nadia said, because she wanted it on the record that she'd been minding her own business before any of this happened. A ghost of something crossed his face. "Yes." He turned to Cord. "Get Morrow up here now." To another man by the door, "I want every frame of footage from that garage. Every camera, every angle, everything from 6 p.m. tonight until Cord picked her up." He turned back to Nadia, and his expression was calculating in a way that should have been alarming but was also oddly direct. "Sit down, Miss Okafor. I need to understand what you saw." She told him everything, the sound she'd almost missed, the position of the girl's body, the car, the blue tinge of her lips, the monogram, the phone. She told him about Evangeline's words, the man with the rings, the elevator, the dizziness. And she watched something happen in Vincent Ferraro's face when she said it. It wasn't exactly visible. It was more like watching the surface of deep water go still. "The man with the rings," he repeated, quietly. "That's what she said." He turned away from Nadia. Cord was already in the doorway. Something passed between them in the language of men who have worked together long enough to communicate without words. Cord said, very quietly, "Renner has rings." And Vincent said nothing at all, which was somehow much worse than any reply. A man named Morrow arrived 8 minutes later. He was slight, silver-haired, and carried a black medical bag with the practiced efficiency of someone who had never once in his life worked in an environment with malpractice insurance. He examined Evangeline with a thoroughness that impressed Nadia despite herself, checking her pupils, her pulse, her reflexes, asking her careful questions in a gentle voice that was clearly practiced. "She's been sedated," Morrow announced, straightening up and addressing Vincent directly. "Something benzodiazepine adjacent, something cleaner, administered within the last 2 to 3 hours. Given her size, whoever dosed her calculated it precisely enough to incapacitate her without going further." He paused. This wasn't impulsive. Someone knew her weight, her metabolic blood profile, someone who had access to her medical records. The room temperature dropped. "Get me the list," Vincent said to Cord. "Already running," Cord said. Evangeline had fallen into a real sleep by then, color coming back to her face, her breathing evening out into something comfortable and regular. She had one hand wrapped around the sleeve of Nadia's cardigan, which was still draped over her, and she had refused to release it even after her father's arrival. There was something about that detail, the way this 8-year-old, who clearly had access to every comfort in the world, was hanging onto a second-hand cardigan from a Goodwill on Wabash, that lodged in Nadia's chest and wouldn't move. Vincent appeared at her shoulder. "She won't let go," Nadia said, indicating the sleeve. "No," Vincent said. He studied his daughter's face for a moment. "She has good instincts." He looked at Nadia. "What do you know about who I am?" Nadia considered the question honestly. "I know you're not the kind of person whose name I should be Googling right now." This time the ghost crossed his face and almost became an expression. "Accurate." He reached into his jacket and set a folder on the coffee table in front of her. It was thin, but it was there, and it had her name on it, and it had been assembled fast enough that she understood it had been done between the phone call and her arrival, which meant someone with access to a considerable amount of information had spent 12 minutes on it. Nadia Okafor, 26 years old. Originally from Baltimore. Aide at Cook County, 3 years. No criminal record. $62,000 in student loan debt for a nursing degree you had to leave incomplete when your mother was diagnosed. Nadia looked at the folder. She looked at him. "Single," he continued, his voice flat and informational and somehow still managing to feel personal. "No family in the city. You work 3 shifts a week at Cook County and 2 nights a week at a diner in Pilsen to cover your mother's treatment costs. You drive a 2009 Civic with a brake light that needs replacing." He paused. "You are, by every metric, someone who had no reason to stop." "She was a child," Nadia said. "She was breathing wrong." Vincent looked at her for a long moment with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Yes," he said. "She was." He reached for his phone, typed something brief, and set it back down. Nadia's phone buzzed in the pocket of her scrubs. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. A notification from her student loan servicer. Payment received, full balance cleared, account status current. She looked up at him. "That's $62,000, she said. "You know how much you owe." He said it without inflection. You can't just, "I can," Vincent said. "I did. My daughter is alive because you chose to stop in a parking garage at 2 in the morning. $62,000 is what that's worth to me. In reality, it is worth considerably more, which is something I will need to discuss with you, but at the moment I have more immediate problems." He looked back toward Cord, who had just come back into the room with his phone face out, showing something to Vincent that made the man's jaw set. "The footage from the garage. Is it him?" Cord's expression answered before his words did. "It's Renner." Nadia had been in enough waiting rooms and triage bays to know when something was about to tip into crisis. She could feel it in the room the way you could feel weather changing. A pressure drop, a stillness before the wind. And then the lights went out. Not dimmed, cut, completely. The penthouse plunged into the particular darkness of a room where all the smart technology had been killed at once. No stand lights, no blinking indicators, no ambient glow from the city because the windows had auto-tinted in the last second before the power died. "Down," Cord said, from directly beside Nadia, and his hand on her shoulder put her on the floor before the command fully registered. The sound that followed was not a single explosion but a sequence. The building's emergency access stairwell door, hitting the wall on the north end of the floor, the distinct metallic clamor of tactical equipment, and then the flashlight beams cutting through the dark like knives, strobing and systematic. Vincent's voice came from somewhere in the blackness, steady, low, positioned away from where she'd last seen him. 3 east, 2 north. Cord, cover Evangeline. What happened next was something Nadia had no framework for. She had seen chaos. The ER on a Saturday night was a sustained exercise in controlled mayhem. But this was different. This was the dark and the sound of men moving fast and precisely, and the suppressed bursts of weapons that sounded like pneumatic tools rather than gunshots, and the heavier crashes of furniture and glass that followed each one. Nadia stayed low. She thought about Evangeline, still asleep on the sofa, impossibly asleep, which the sedative was doing its work in the most terrible and also most fortunate timing possible. She began crawling in the direction she'd last seen the sofa, using the edge of a heavy coffee table as a guide, navigating by shape and memory in absolute darkness. A flashlight beam swept through the room and caught her. She went flat. The man holding it was moving toward her. Nadia's hand found the coffee table's edge and then found something on it. A heavy glass sculpture, the kind that sat on expensive tables in rooms like this one. Dense, substantial. She gripped it. The man was 3 feet away, 2 feet. His flashlight panned over the sofa, caught the shape of a sleeping child. Nadia came up from the floor and swung the sculpture into the junction of the man's elbow and his flashlight. The light spun wildly. He didn't fall, but he staggered, and that was enough. Because Vincent materialized from the dark behind him in the same moment, and what happened next was brief and final. The flashlight stopped moving on the floor, pointing at the ceiling. Silence. And then, from somewhere on the north side of the room, clear, and then Cord, clear east. The emergency generator kicked on 12 seconds later, flooding the room with red auxiliary light. It turned everything the color of something terrible. 4 men in tactical gear were down on the floor. The north windows, triple-paned, hurricane-rated, had been breached near the stairwell door. Wind off the lake moved through the penthouse like a presence, cold and relentless. Vincent stood in the center of the room. His jacket was gone. There was a cut along his left forearm that had soaked through his shirt sleeve. He was assessing his men with the methodical focus of someone running inventory. And when his eyes reached Nadia, on her feet, the glass sculpture still in her hand, positioned between the downed flashlight and the sofa where Evangeline slept, he stopped. He crossed to her. He took the sculpture out of her hand with a steadiness that transferred through his fingers into hers. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," Nadia said. Her voice was doing something she didn't have control over. A slight tremor that she was very tired of. "She's still asleep. I was trying to get between him and her." Vincent looked at Evangeline. Then he looked at Nadia in a way that lasted long enough to feel like something more than an appraisal. "I know," he said. Cord appeared. His face was careful in the way faces got when the news wasn't going to be well received. Renner wasn't with them. He sent his crew, and he's not here. A pause. "And we've got a problem. Morrow." Vincent turned. Morrow was in the corner of the room by the kitchen island, very still, hands slightly raised in the way of a man who understood the optics of being discovered in a bad position. He was holding his medical bag, but he was holding it in front of him, and the way he was holding it was wrong. Not the comfortable grip of a man who'd been carrying it all night. The grip of a man who needed it to stay closed. Nadia had seen it earlier and not registered it as significant. Morrow had checked Evangeline's reflexes, a standard neuro assessment, but he'd gone back to her left arm twice. Not her face, not her pupils, her left arm. And he'd been receiving phone notifications during the firefight, which a man taking cover in a kitchen should not have been checking. "Her left arm," Nadia said, and her voice came out flat and certain. He kept going back to it. Vincent's eyes moved to her. "When I came in," Nadia said, because she was past the point of softening anything, Evangeline's left arm had a small pressure mark inside the elbow. I thought it was from where she'd fallen, but Morrow examined her twice in that spot, and both times his hands went between her body and the sofa. "He's got something in that bag." Morrow's composure broke in the particular way that composure broke when it had been manufactured in the first place. He took a step back. Cord was already between him and the exit. "Open it," Vincent said. Quiet. Absolute. Morrow didn't move. Vincent crossed to him in 4 steps, took the bag from his hands without visible effort, and opened it on the kitchen island under the harsh red light of the backup generator. Medical supplies, neatly organized, and behind the stethoscope, separated from the rest by a 2 syringes in a sealed case. The liquid in them was not clear. It was pale yellow, slightly viscous, the kind of color that did not belong in a legitimate medical kit. Renner couldn't get to her in the parking garage because she was already gone, Vincent said, almost to himself. He was looking at the syringes, so he needed a second access point. The doctor called in. He looked up at Morrow, and Nadia had never seen an expression like that on a human face before. Not rage exactly, but something colder and more complete than rage. "He called you after I brought her here." "He has my wife," Morrow said. The words came out of him like they'd been stored under pressure. "He's had her since Tuesday. I didn't. I wouldn't have. I tried to get through the examination without it. I was going to tell you You were going to do it," Vincent said. "And tell yourself you had no choice." Morrow had no answer for that. What happened next, Vincent did not do in front of Nadia. He said something in Italian to Cord, 2 words, and Cord took Nadia firmly but without violence by the elbow and walked to the hallway, and the door to the main room closed. Nadia stood in the hallway for 40 seconds. Then the sound of a single quiet report. Then silence. Then the door opened. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it," Vincent said, standing in the doorframe. The cut on his arm had been wrapped with something, a dish towel, dark with damp. He looked like what he was, which was a man who had just done something that most people could not do, and was going to have to keep going anyway. "Renner is the man who ran logistics for the east side of my operation for 11 years. He decided, 3 months ago, that he should be running the operation. His method for achieving that was to use Evangeline to force my. He stopped. She was supposed to be leverage. She was never supposed to survive the night. Nadia let that settle. "You've known it was him," she said. "Since Cord said the rings, I suspected, now I know." He looked at her steadily. "Renner will be dead by sunrise. His crew is already accounted for, but he had people inside my organization, and I don't know yet how many, which means I cannot move Evangeline to the safe house I was planning to use, because I cannot guarantee it hasn't been compromised." A pause. "I need someone she trusts inside this apartment until I can sweep every asset and property I have and confirm what's clean. Someone outside my organization. Someone Renner has no reason to know about." "You're asking me to stay," Nadia said. "I'm asking you to consider that you are now a woman Renner knows exists, because his crew watched you come through the garage entrance, and they will have reported it, and when they fail to report again, Renner will know why, and he will look for the variable. A beat. You are the variable. Nadia looked at the closed door to the main room. She looked at the hallway, which led to the elevator she'd arrived in. She thought about her 2009 Civic with the brake light that needed replacing, parked in a garage on West Ohio Street, and her apartment in Pilsen with the radiator that knocked twice every hour on the hour, and her checking account with $19 in it, and the student loan balance that as of 40 minutes ago read 0. I have a shift in 14 hours, she said. I'll have you covered, Vincent said. Whatever you need covered. I need to call my mother. You can do that. She looked at him. She wanted to ask the right question, and the right question was the one nobody in her position was supposed to ask, because the answer was obvious, and obvious answers were the ones people in her position were not supposed to acknowledge out loud. But Nadia Okafor had been choosing the harder path her entire adult life without anyone offering her anything in return. And she was tired, and she was scared. She was also, in some cellular, irreducible part of herself, not particularly interested in pretending that the situation was anything other than exactly what it was. If I stay, she said, are you planning to let me leave when it's safe? Vincent Ferraro looked at her with those eyes that had seen considerably more of the world than they had any obligation to tell her about. You can walk to that elevator right now, he said. I will have 2 men follow you to your car and 2 more on your building tonight, because Renner's people have seen your face. That much I owe you regardless. But I will not keep you here, he paused. I'm asking, not ordering. Behind the closed door, a small voice said, Nadia. Evangeline had woken up. Nadia heard her own name in that thin, careful voice, and felt it do something to the architecture of her resolve. She walked past Vincent and opened the door. Evangeline was sitting up on the sofa, blinking in the red backup light, her dark eyes moving around the room until they found Nadia. The cardigan was still around her shoulders. You're still here, Evangeline said. Not relieved, exactly. More like she had been holding a question and this was the answer. I'm still here, Nadia said and sat down beside her. Vincent stood in the doorway. He was watching his daughter lean against this woman who was essentially a stranger in the wreckage of a room that looked like the aftermath of a storm, and something was happening in his face that Nadia could not fully read. It was the expression of a man who had spent a long time being very certain about what the world was made of, confronting evidence that something had been left out of his accounting. I'll take the room next to hers, Nadia said, without looking up. Cord, from somewhere behind Vincent, made a sound that was not quite a word. Vincent said nothing, but he reached over and pulled the broken north window, covering down as far as it would go, and the wind off Lake Michigan eased slightly, and the backup lights cast everything in red that was slowly becoming something you could live with rather than something you feared. In the morning, the news would carry a brief item about an incident in a parking structure on the north side. No injuries reported. The item would be small and would not be followed up. The city would move through its ordinary rhythms, buses and bridges, and the smell of the lake in early September, and somewhere in the Gold Coast, a man who ran the kind of organization that never made the news would be working through the problem of a traitor named Renner with the same focused efficiency he brought to every problem that needed solving. But in the penthouse, at that hour, what was true was simple. An 8-year-old girl was asleep, with one hand around a second-hand cardigan. A woman who had $19 in her checking account 12 hours ago was watching over her, and the most dangerous man in Chicago was standing in the doorway between the hallway and the room where the people he needed most in the world currently were, unwilling to let either of them out of his sight. By the time Renner was found, and he was found on a Tuesday in a suburb of Milwaukee he'd mistakenly believed was far enough, Evangeline had started calling Nadia by a shorter name, and Vincent Ferraro, who had built an empire on the principle that everything had a price and nothing was given freely, had begun to understand that the woman who had stopped in a parking garage because a child was breathing wrong was the only person in his world who had ever offered him something he hadn't been able to account for in advance. He was, for the first time in 14 years, grateful for something he hadn't arranged. If you were holding your breath during that parking garage scene, you already know what this story is. the kind that gets under your skin and stays there. Hit the like button if Nadia stopping for Evangeline hit you right in the chest, and subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library for new stories every week. Drop your answer in the comments. Would you have stopped? Or would you have kept walking and told yourself someone else would handle it? There's no wrong answer. But something tells me the people in this comment section already know what they would have done.